name, by the way?
Isa.
Isa. Okay.
Yes, it's like short for Isabella.
Ah, of course.
Yes. So thank you so much for being here again with me.
My pleasure.
Yeah. I would love to like make more interesting questions, but since this is for a paper to media, like I guess they have to be like a little bit more basic. So I'm sorry about that.
Well, how about we ask the basic questions and then you can ask a couple of interesting questions at the end.
Deal.
Okay.
So, well, for the people who will be watching or reading this interview later, can you give them like a little bit of a summary about what To Sleep in a Sea of Stars is about?
Well, To Sleep in a Sea of Stars is an epic science fiction story full of spaceships, lasers, aliens, heartache, adventure, and of course, tentacles. But it's also a very deeply personal story of transformation. And there was a lot I was trying to say with this story while still telling an entertaining adventure. So whether or not you've read my previous books or whether or not you are a reader of science fiction, I think anyone can pick up this story and read it and enjoy it on its own terms. And I made a real effort to not overload readers with technical information or anything like that. It is a technically grounded story, but that's not the point of the story. So it's not a high school, it's not a college textbook or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Besides, for the people who really love all the details, you have like an, how do you say it, like an appendix at the end of the book. It's really detailed. It's amazing.
The appendix is my version of show your homework, show your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Show your research.
Exactly. Well, and I did a lot of research for this book, so it was nice to have a place to sort of put it together in one big lump for those people who are interested in that sort of thing the way I am.
Okay, so this story begins with Kira, who is a xenobiologist. That's how do you say it, right? And she finds something. Tell us a little bit about that, like discovery she makes at the beginning of the book.
So near the beginning of the book, Kira discovers an alien artifact. She's part of a survey team that's investigating a planet for possible a human settlement. And she accidentally finds this alien artifact. It's not the first alien artifact that humans have found, but it's the first real evidence of alien intelligence. And this takes place about 250 years in the future. And her discovery transforms both her and then sends her and human civilization at the same time and sends her off racing across the galaxy to deal with the consequences of her discovery. I'm sort of dancing around spoilers here. I'm not quite sure how much we want to discuss because I think it's really cool what happens, but I also don't want to spoil readers' enjoyment.
Yeah, absolutely. They have to find out the story for themselves.
Exactly.
I know that To Sleep in a Sea of Stars is a book. It's a book that has been many years in the making, right? Like, can you tell me a little bit about the story of all the ups and downs this book has had, and everything that happened until you literally could like hold a physical copy of the book in your hands?
Sure. So in 2011, near the end of 2011, I published the last novel in the Eragon series, which was Inheritance. In English, it's called Inheritance. And I was touring for Inheritance through the end of 2011, and then for a large portion of 2012, because I went on a worldwide tour, and I was doing events all over the place. So at the end of that, I was exhausted. Not just from that particular book tour, but also from the fact that I had been working on this one story from the age of 15 until 26, 27, so about 11 years. And I was not the same person at 26, 27 that I was at 15, thankfully. But I was also just worn out from working on the same project for so long. So I took some time off. I wrote some short stories that a few of which ended up in my short story collection, The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm, which came out at 2019, beginning of 2019. Sorry, time is growing strange these days.
I don't know where I live now, or when I live.
Exactly. I wrote a screenplay that didn't work, as all novelists must, and I wrote a short prequel novel for what became To Sleep. And in fact, I'm revising that prequel novel now. But all of that was just to refresh my brain, was to give myself some variety in my writing experience. And then in 2013, I started seriously doing the research for what was going to become To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. Now, I got the idea for the story of To Sleep in a Sea of Stars back in 2006. So it's been with me for a very long time. And I put the idea to the side because I needed to finish the inheritance cycle. Having written fantasy, I knew the amount of effort it took to build an imaginary world, to build a new setting. And I wanted to do justice to the genre of science fiction, but there was an additional difficulty because, unlike fantasy, I wanted my science fiction to be set in the real world. So yes, it's in the future, but it includes all of known history, all of known physics. You know, Earth as we know it exists in To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. And that was a real constraint because it meant all of the science needed to be based in some recognizable reality. And even if there are advances and new discoveries, they can't contradict what we already know to be true. Now, I was homeschooled my whole life, and I'm very glad I was homeschooled, but that meant that when I started this scientific research, even though I've always been interested in science and done a lot of reading on science, I wasn't where I needed to be in terms of grasping the subject material. So that's why for 2013, I spent an entire year reading about, you know, where are computers going? What are the great unanswered questions in physics? How might they be answered? And searching for answers for all this and potential answers. The biggest technological physics issue I had to grapple with was how I could have my humans in the future traveling faster than light so that my story could go from, you know, one star to the next without taking hundreds or thousands of years. And the difficulty with that is, according to physics as we know it, if you travel faster than light, you automatically have a time machine. And I have nothing against time travel as a storytelling device, but I didn't want my average everyday spaceship to also be a time machine in To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. So to find some means of faster than light travel that hadn't been used by some other science fiction franchise, that didn't contradict physics as we know it, and didn't allow for time travel was really hard. And I ended up finding an aerospace engineer by the name of Gregory Mahalik, who has dabbled in some theoretical physics in his spare time. And he and some other folks have devised a new theory, which formed the basis, which allowed for everything I was looking for and formed the basis for my faster than light travel. And that was just one aspect of the universe I was creating. There were, like I said, I had to look at, you know, how would you fight in space? How would you colonize another planet? How would you grow food, and so forth and so on. And it was a lot of fun, and it was worth doing it, not just for this book, but because To Sleep in a Sea of Stars is the first of what will be many stories set within what I'm calling the Fractalverse. And in fact, I don't know if you can see, but this pin I'm wearing is the logo for the Fractalverse.
Which is in the hardcover too, isn't it?
That's right. It should be on the cover of the English edition, and it's printed inside of, all the other editions. So, and if anyone is interested, they can visit my new website, which is fractalverse.net. And I have commissioned some really amazing concept art from Hollywood concept artists. I mean, these guys have worked on Star Wars, they've worked on Black Panther, they've worked on, I mean, the list goes on and on. So I have tons of art for all the creatures and things of the book, and there's more art coming in. So if anyone wants to learn more about the Fractalverse and just look at some cool art and listen to some cool music and all of that, I highly recommend they pop over to fractalverse.net.
Yeah, I saw like the jellies illustration you posted like a few days ago. It's amazing.
Thank you. Well, that is the artists. I mean, I gave them the description, but they're the ones who came up with the details, and it does look gorgeous.
Yeah, absolutely. So you just mentioned the Fractalverse. So I wanted to know how like intimidating is to know you're writing the first book, which will present this macro universe to the readers. How do you feel about that?
It's really it's daunting, and it's the most daunting part of it is knowing that the rules for the universe that I establish in this first book will set the tone for what I can and can't do. And the idea behind the Fractalverse is that any story I write that is not actually fantasy can be within the Fractalverse. So I spent a lot of time really thinking about, my own philosophical views of human advancement and technology, and what I think may or may not be possible within the universe, and then applying this to the Fractalverse, and with such a degree that I can hopefully, again, tell whatever stories I want within that framework into the future. Now, I'm not going to be, I'm not going to stop myself from writing the stories I want to write if I happen to think of one specific book that will never fit in the Fractalverse and it won't fit in the world of Eragon. But in general, that was the goal. So that's one reason why it took so much time, as I was just being really, really careful. Because as I learned with the inheritance cycle, whatever choices you make at the beginning of a world bind you forever. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you do need to be careful with it.
Yeah, especially when you have such like attentive readers that catch up
Oh, yes.
anything.
Oh, yes.
In this story, like To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, I think like it's not only a great tribute to sci-fi as a genre itself, but it's like a very human approach to like the vastness that is the universe. I thought so.
Thank you.
And through Kira, we understand how it is to fear like not being in control of your own body or even your own thoughts. And I feel like that is one of the key points of this book. So would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, the vastness of space is reflected in the title of the book itself. It is one of the underlying themes, not just vastness of space itself, but just the sheer variety and immensity of existence. I find it incredibly frustrating that I can't hop into a spaceship right now and go exploring out in the universe, because there might be a whole lot of nothing out there. It might be actually very boring, but we don't know. And yeah, it would be wonderful to go out and see that. And since I can't, I write about it. But as far as the themes of the book, yes, the question of control and personal growth were central to why I wanted to write this story. I feel as if one of the great challenges of adulthood, if not the greatest challenge of adulthood, is to learn how to deal with the things that we can't control. Because there are lots of things in life that are outside of our control. And you can either, tear yourself apart. You can tear yourself apart out of frustration or grief or anger or whatever, or you can learn to accept it. And that's maybe not a very triumphal view of the world, but at the same time, it doesn't change the fact that there are things we can't change. And I feel as if we all have to come to terms with that. And probably one of the most difficult things to do is when that involves your body. We all get sick sometimes, and these days that's perhaps more relevant than ever. Exactly. Or you break a bone, or something happens and your body isn't the way you would like it to be. And how you deal with that mentally and physically, I think, is incredibly important, and something I wanted to deal with in the context of a fun adventure story that will hopefully still say something interesting and move readers a little bit.
Yeah, it's incredible everything Kira goes through. I didn't know if I wanted to be her or if I didn't want it to be her. Like it was that like fight every single page of the book.
No, I definitely don't want to be her, but I enjoy writing her and reading about her.
Yeah, it's like the unknown versus the really cool powers. Okay, so normally I think in sci-fi we come across many artificial intelligences. But you gave that concept a twist and you created one of the, in my opinion, best characters ever, which is Regorovich, right? But I don't know, it's a ship mind. So
yeah,
I love he's always like in the verge of insanity. So how did you find writing that particular being?
I hate to say this because I'm not sure how it reflects on me, but of all the characters, Grigorovich is probably the closest to me.
You go. I love it.
In terms of, I don't know. I love writing characters who are able to sort of let go linguistically, and I get to play with the language more. And Grigorovich's viewpoint is a very interesting one. During my research into science, artificial intelligence was something I spent a lot of time reading about, and I may be wrong on this. I'm 100% prepared to be wrong on this. But during my reading, I became convinced that true artificial intelligence is a lot harder to achieve than we think it is, and is further off than we think it is if it can ever actually be done. And the reason for this is that, so far as we know, we are the only intelligent, self-aware, intelligent species in the universe. Now, there are probably others, but we're the only ones we know of. And that intelligence that we have and that self-awareness that we have is inextricably linked to our brains, to the physical structure of our brains. Take the brain away, we don't have that awareness. And we do not understand how consciousness and self-awareness arises from the physical structure of the brain. That is still an open question in science. We may figure it out someday, but at the moment we do not have a specific answer for that. So to attempt to replicate that in a machine with wires and circuits and transistors and all of that, when we don't even understand how it works with cells and neurons and basic biology, seems a bit of a folly. Now, we do have quote unquote artificial intelligence now with things like Siri and Alexa and all of that. Those are what in my book I call pseudo intelligences. So they are extremely helpful. They might give the appearance of being intelligent at times because they can answer you, they can do things, but they are not self-aware. And if you were to ask them to create something, they might be able to create something based on an algorithm, but I think that they wouldn't be able to reflect on it the way that, you know, a human that's self-aware is. So that's the distinction I made, and that's why I ended up just going in the direction of the ship minds that I have, because I've also been, this is a long answer to a short question, but I've always been fascinated by how people change their bodies, you know, whether it's tattoos or piercings or drugs or, you know, whatever. People are always pushing the boundaries of what their bodies are capable of. And you know, we already are seeing it now with gene therapy and genetic alterations that, you know, in 100 years, it's going to be possible to tailor your body in all sorts of interesting ways through gene therapy. So to take that sort of to the logical extreme of, you know, well, you know, if we had this technology and there were people who were willing to do crazy things and, you know, push themselves to the limit, and we know there are, what would actually be possible with that? You know, what could we do, and how far could we take the human brain and mind? And that's where the ship minds came from.
Yeah, I loved him in the book. Like, I think I have like a thing for IAs, which are like crazy. Like, I don't know if you know this, but there's like a YA book called Illumina Files.
Oh yeah, I have it sitting on my shelf.
Yeah, by J. Christopher and Amy Kaufman, and there's like a very crazy IA there.
I've heard that, and I haven't read it, but I've heard that I should.
It's really a psychopath, basically.
Well, and I grew up playing the old Marathon games from Bungie, and then their later Halo games, which of course have some great AI characters in there. So that probably imprinted on me as well, the whole idea of the crazy AI.
Yeah, taking over the world.
Yeah.
Like, I have always thought that names have power and that they're really important to the story. So I like to know, what's the process for you when it comes to naming important characters or concepts in this book? Like, for example, the soft blade, or I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but the Ranawi, I guess.
Ranawi, yeah.
Yeah, those. So how do you find those names?
It's a complicated and messy procedure. Every name comes about differently. Sometimes there's a feeling I'm trying to capture. Sometimes there is a specific arrangement of letters that I'm attempting to use in a name or attempting to replicate as a pattern across words and names. For example, the Renawi actually came about because the first jelly name that I had was the sort of the big bad in the book, which is Catane.
Yeah.
Now, Catane is actually a real name. There's a mathematician in the United States who has that name, and he co-authored a science fiction book, and I shamelessly stole the name and to pay tribute to him. But the name starts with two consonants, a C and a T. And so all of the jelly names and words start with two consonants as a result, and that gave me a little bit of guidance. In general, though, for To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, I really tried to have a wide variety of names, because if you go to any major city these days, there's such mixing pots, as they say here in the United States. You know, we have so many people from around the world and from different cultural backgrounds and linguistic backgrounds that you never know what type of name you're going to run into. So that was something I tried to capture in the book. Navarra's, Kira's last name actually comes from the first female state senator in Montana, the state I live in, from the 1800s, I believe. She didn't have the accent mark on the name, but I added that. So it wouldn't be said Navarrez. But yeah, that's it comes from all different types. And one thing too that is almost counterintuitive is I also like to include ordinary names even in my science fiction, because if you look through history, you'll find names like John, you know, very classical biblical names. Usually they have lasted for sometimes thousands of years. So yes, I have some crazy made-up names. I also have some more unusual names that are not made up, and then I wanted some ordinary names, which I felt was important. I mean, and it sometimes trips you up. Like, for example, the name Tiffany, at least in the United States, feels like a very modern name. You know, feels like a very 20th century name, Tiffany, except it's from the 12th century. You could write a story set in the 12th century with knights and swords and all of that and have a female named character named Tiffany, and it would be historically accurate, but no one would believe it because it feels wrong.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Well, you also, this is kind of spoilery, kind of not. We can cut this out when we give this to the paper, but you also like left an Easter egg in the form of a name, like connecting both of your worlds, right?
Yes, there is a character who makes an appearance in To Sleep in a Sea of Stars that I think some readers of Eragon and the other novels of the Inheritance Cycle will recognize. And if you're a little curious if that is who you think it is, that question is answered in the afterword.
Yeah, absolutely. When I finished the book, like I was like, is it really? So I went to the internet, and then I ended up in a very passionate like Reddit thread. People were freaking out. So I was not alone in my theory.
No. There's a reason for her being there, by the way, but I can't tell you.
Well, you will answer that in the future, I guess.
Exactly.
So how's everything going with the screenplay?
It's going well. I'm currently polishing the final draft, or at least the final draft of the first version. Put it that way.
Okay.
And I'm very excited to have it out of my hair, because writing screenplays, I enjoy it, but this is an adaptation of a story that I've been working on for 10 years now. So it'll be nice to completely move on to something new. But that said, very excited with how the screenplay is going, and hopefully should have some more movie news on the adaptation to share with people before too long.
On your webpage.
Yes, on fractalverse.net, and of course on my social media.
So my last question, because apparently Zoom only records 30 minutes. It's like sometimes us as readers like are a little afraid when like an author we admire publishes a book within a different genre, which you know, that's your case with the Inheritance Cycle, which is fantasy, and then To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, which is hard sci-fi, as I call it. What would you say to your readers that are like accustomed to only reading fantasy? Like, how would you convince them to pick up this book?
Give it a shot, because science fiction is not so different from fantasy. They're both imaginative, speculative fiction. They're both imagining a world that doesn't exist. They're both imagining rules of physics that don't exist. And if you like my storytelling, and if you like the feel of the story of the inheritance cycle, I think you will get that same feeling from To Sleep. Fair warning, it is an adult novel, and it's not as warm and cuddly as Eragon. Kira is a much colder character than Eragon. But ultimately, I was aiming for a lot of this, hopefully, to evoke many of the same emotions in my readers, that sense of awe and wonder. I wanted to examine a number of the same issues, questions of life, the universe, and everything. So if you like those things, and if you like bad jokes also, if you like bad puns, then I think you will really enjoy this book.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I loved Eragon and I love this too, so I can guarantee it.
Awesome. That should be the blurb on the back of the book.
Yeah. Like, to finish, like, this is a personal question. Like, tell me I can see Falcone again in one of your books.
So Falcone was actually partly inspired by the character Commissario Montalbano, if you've ever seen that show from Sicily. I love that character, and he was in my mind a bit when I was writing Falcone. So I sort of imagined him of like a 50-50 mix between Montalbano and Oscar Isaac, the actor.
Oh, okay.
No, we will definitely see Falcone again. We will definitely see him and the crew of the Wallfish again. And if anyone is curious to see the Wallfish ship, again, they can go to fractalverse.net, and we have some awesome art for that. And we're going to have some art for Falcone before too long also.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, before anything, I want to tell you like something really funny a friend of mine said, which he read the book. He loved Falcone also, and he was like, oh my God, I love every time they're going to go on FTL because he takes off his shirt.
I think
literally what he said.
I think Kira gets a little fond of it too by the end of the book.
Absolutely. Yeah, I thought that was the best comment ever.
I like that. I'm actually going to pass that on to my editor.
Absolutely. So yeah, thank you so much for this, Christopher, again.
My pleasure, anytime. Thank you, and just a big thank you to everyone for reading my books. I very much appreciate it, and I hope everyone enjoys To Sleep in a Sea of Stars as much as I enjoyed writing it.